Okay, great. So good morning, everybody. So Natalie and I are going to kind of tag team a regional housing needs assessment update. So I'm going to go through sort of a brief introduction and then give some of the Rockingham Planning Commission key findings. And then I'll hand it over to Natalie and she'll go through Stratford. And then we'll talk a little bit about sort of both of our fair share housing needs projection numbers, and then finally wrapping it up with sort of next steps and give you guys a sense of sort of what's coming next as a follow-up to the housing needs assessments. So to kick things off, some of you have probably already seen bits of this presentation, I think from both myself and Natalie, but hopefully this is new to the majority of you all. So the regional housing needs assessment, just to give you all a sense of sort of what the purpose is, the history behind it. The purpose is really for this document to be an advisory document for our municipalities and to be a resource. So we've provided data on both housing and demographics by income level so that each municipality in the region can begin to understand their current housing need and their projected future housing need. As part of all of the regional housing needs assessments, there was quite a bit of sort of outreach that was conducted. First and foremost, there was statewide coordination across all 9 New Hampshire planning commissions to create sort of a common framework, which we all based our housing needs assessments off of. So while, regardless of where you are in the state, each RPC is releasing and now or in the coming months or weeks, their own housing needs assessment. They'll all be unique to their own region, but they will all sort of follow a common outline framework so that there will be some overlap, hopefully to give some more consistency across the state. We conducted quite a few surveys. In the RPC region, we conducted a total of 6 surveys, but about half of those were done actually at a statewide level in collaboration with the other planning commissions. We also hosted a variety of sort of community events and forums and additional regional and statewide outreach, including one-on-one interviews with regional employers, developers, things of that nature. So I'm going to go through, as I mentioned, just kind of the very high level key findings of sort of the factors impacting regional housing in the Rockingham Planning Commission region. This is really sort of a broad brush overview of what's in the housing needs assessment. It's by no means a comprehensive overview, but I think it gives a really good snapshot of just sort of what we're looking at as a region and a little bit of sort of what we're looking at as a state. So really the big factors that we found that are impacting housing in our region are that the population is increasing, the population is aging, housing production has slowed, cost of housing is increasing, employment trends and immigration are changing the market, and the current housing stock does not meet the needs of our communities. And then lastly, sort of income has lagged, income has increased, but it has lagged behind how quickly housing prices have continued to increase. So just kind of stepping through each of these findings, as I mentioned, regional population is increasing. So between 2000 and 2020, the population in the Rockingham Planning Commission increased from about 178,000 to just under 200,000. And we're projected to continue to increase by 2040 to just over 220,000. The population is also aging. So in 2010, our average age regionally went from 43 in 2010 to 47 in 2020. This trend was sort of consistent across all of our municipalities with a couple exceptions. And this obviously has implications on sort of the demand for, housing type, services in the region based off of how our population is changing. And housing production has slowed. So while the population has continued to increase and is projected to continue to increase, housing production really, right before sort of the 2008 recession the amount of building permits that were being pulled to build housing significantly dropped off. And it did start to increase, in the 2010s to about 2020, but it really hasn't sort of caught up back to pre-recession levels by any means. And then our cost of housing is increasing both on the renter household side as well as the homeowner household size. So in the Rockingham Planning Commission region, the median gross rent between 2010 and 2020 increased by almost 50%. And the median home price during that same period increased by almost 100%. So it almost doubled in a 12-year period. Employment trends and in-migration are changing the market. So as many of you know, as we've talked about time and time again on these calls, employment trends are changing. Folks are working from home more. The way people are commuting has changed. And also, a lot of people are coming into the state of New Hampshire from out of state to purchase homes. So we saw a significant jump, especially in 2020 and 2021, of folks from out of state coming into New Hampshire to purchase homes. And I mentioned, the current housing stock just doesn't really align with the needs of our communities, the current needs. Two of the metrics that we looked at, I guess there's a few metrics that we looked at to sort of come up with this finding, but the two on this slide, so one has to do with sort of homeowners and the other one has to do with rental households. So you'll see the regional months to absorb. What that metric is showing us is how many months it would take to sell the inventory of active listings at the current pace if no new listings were added. So we can see here that in 2010, the regional months to absorb metric was just over 1.5, which was about 6 weeks that it would take to absorb sort of the current inventory of active listings at the current pace if no new listings were added to the market. In 2021, that decreased to less than 1 week that it would take to sell off the current full inventory of active listings at the current pace. So meaning that there's less houses on the market for sale, and we're not really replacing those listings with new listings. When we look at the rental side of things, we look at vacancy rates. So in 2010, the vacancy rate for the region was about 3.1. A healthy, what they say, a healthy balanced rental vacancy for a healthy balanced rental market is about 5%. So even in 2010, we still had a lower vacancy rate, but it was definitely closer to the sort of healthy market. Whereas in 2022, we saw a rental vacancy rate of 0.6%, so much, much lower. The other metric that's on this slide has to do with housing choice vouchers in our region, which is the sort of program that HUD facilitates to service sort of our low income and our very low income households. And this just illustrates that there's also a demand and a need at that sort of very low income level as well. So in the Rockingham Planning Commission region, we have just over 1,000 households that are currently housed using housing choice vouchers or Section 8 vouchers. We have 55 households across the state, across the region who have been accepted into the program, have a housing choice voucher, but have not been able to find a unit that would take that voucher. So they're currently seeking a housing unit to live in that would allow them to use their housing choice voucher. And then we have about 1,200 folks who are on the wait list trying to get into the housing choice voucher in our region. The other metric that we can look at to sort of gauge, whether or not our current housing stock is meeting our needs is this cost burden metric. So what this looks at is the percentage of households who are technically what we call cost burdened based off of their household expenses of how much they're paying for their housing. So their mortgage, their rent, their property taxes, their utilities, etc. So for in our region for owner households, so those who own their home, we can see that about 26% of all owner households in our region are cost burden. And what that means is that they're spending more than 30% of their total household income towards their housing expenses. When we look on the renter side, that number increases pretty significantly to 42% of all rental households in our region are spending more than 30% of their household income on their housing expenses. And then I mentioned income has sort of lagged while housing prices continue to increase. So this is actually a statewide chart that we're looking at, but you can see here that the solid line at the top, the dark blue line, is looking at New Hampshire Zillow home values. And then the dashed line at the bottom, the dark blue line, is looking at New Hampshire median income. So we can see here that while home values have continued to increase and income has also continued to increase, income is increasing at a much slower rate than our home values and the prices of our houses in New Hampshire. Between 2000 and 2020, New Hampshire home values across the state rose by over 110%, whereas the median household income during that same period only rose by 73%. And then this chart just sort of shows how other factors might impact, what you can afford or can't afford as a household. So between 2021 and 2022, as many are aware, the 30-year mortgage rate increased. In 2021, the average 30-year mortgage interest rate was just under 3%. In 2022, we saw it increase to 6.9%. So this chart sort of breaks down what it would cost based off of those two interest rates over those 2 years to purchase the median home sale price in the Rockingham Planning Commission region from a down payment perspective and a monthly payment perspective. So the median home sale price in 2022 in the RPC region was $527,000. In 2021, to purchase that house with a 20% down payment, you would have had to save $105,400, and your monthly payment would have been $2,476. So in order to afford that home, your total income to not be cost burden, right? So not spending more than that 30% of your total household income on your housing expenses, your total income would have had to been $99,000. To purchase that exact same home in 2022 with the higher interest rate, your monthly payment would increase to $3,888, and your income needed to afford that home without being cost burden increased by $56,000 to $155,000. So there's other factors that are sort of playing, external factors outside of our region that are playing into what the housing market looks like in the region. And I'll pause there. I'm going to hand it off to Natalie to go through Stratford's metrics.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So just to warn you, many of RPC's findings are pretty similar to what we'll see with SRPC. So this is our overview page. It's just a summary of factors and trends that are impacting the housing needs in the SRPC region. As of now, we have roughly 69,000 units. Our population is around 156,000 and increasing. Similar to RPC, our population is also aging. There is projected job growth in all of our 18 communities. Both the average household size and the households with children are declining. The units available for sale and rent are also declining, while the cost of housing is increasing. Rental vacancy rates are historically low and decreasing, and housing is becoming out of reach for many of the region's primary industry job holders. And we'll go over each of these in more detail in the slides to follow. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I said, population is increasing. As of 2020, the region had a population of just over 156,000 people and has been steadily increasing since the date of this data. According to population projections, we know that it will continue to increase at a similar rate that it has at this point. By 2050, it's expected that it will have grown by almost 21,000 people. And the map just shows the population density throughout the region, where we can see that there's a higher rate of concentration in the Tri-Cities, as well as certain areas of Durham, Newmarket, and Farmington. Next slide, please. So here we see population is aging. The population by age graph, which is the top right, shows that the population over 65 is the fastest growing age group in our region. It also shows that the 18 to 24 age group has historically been the largest group in the region. And as we all know, the major driver of this high number are the number of young adults that are UNH students, which about 10,000 of them live in Durham, and only about 500 of those 10,000 are actually Durham residents, not UNH students. Then the median age graph, which is at the bottom right, shows that the median age in Stratford County remains pretty constant, only increasing 0.3 years over a decade, but Carroll and Rockingham counties, however, have aged at more accelerated rates, with Carroll's median age increasing by 6.6 years and Rockingham's by 3.3 years. And then looking at the change in median age between 2010 and 2020 on the table to the left, we see that median ages have climbed in 15 of the region's 18 municipalities, with the only exceptions being Brookfield, Dover, and New Durham. For us, the town of Stratford has had the greatest hike in median age, increasing by 10 years over the past decade. And the SRPC community with the lowest median age is, not surprisingly, Durham, but this is a bit of an outlier since we have the large student population there. So I'll point out the next community with the lowest median age, which is Dover at 35.7 years. And then the community with the highest median age for us is Wakefield, with the median age of 50.3 years. Next slide, please. So as I said before, we have projected job growth in all 18 communities. Currently, the SRPC labor force is roughly 87,000 people. And the graph shows labor force participation in the region. And as you can see, it's grown pretty consistently since 2010 and in the years leading up to the pandemic. And then, of course, there was a significant drop in 2020. However, the 2022 data that we have, which is not shown in this graph, does show that by the end of the year, we were pretty much back at pre-pandemic levels when it comes to labor force. New Hampshire employment security projections throughout 2045 show that increase in the number of jobs in all 18 municipalities in the region. And then the Venn diagram shows the in-area labor efficiency for 2019, where we can see that almost 46,000 people lived in the region but worked outside, and 31,000 lived and worked in the region. And then just over 4,000 people worked in the region but lived outside of it. We also know that most SRPC workers that live within the region live in the Tri-Cities as well as Durham, and most of those living outside of the region live in Portsmouth, Manchester, and Concord. And this is pretty consistent with the work locations of SRPC residents, which is mostly concentrated in the Tri-Cities, followed by Farmington and Barrington. Next slide, please. Average household size is declining, and the number of households with children is as well. New Hampshire already contains below average size households than the whole US, particularly in renter-occupied homes. The table to the left shows a lot of information, so I did pull some numbers to the right to show that two-person households are the most common types of households in the region, followed by one-person households and then three-person households. So pretty small. In our region, Madbury is the community with the largest household size, and Newmarket is the community with the lowest. As I said before, we also know that the average household size for owner-occupied units is higher than renter-occupied units. That's true for our region as well. And lastly, the number of households with children has been declining. So over the past decade, the number of households with children in our regions has decreased from 31% to 26%. Next slide, please. The number of units available for sale and for rent is becoming increasingly limited. So since the after effects of the recession, building permitting has shown an overall upward trend, but nothing even close to what was seen in prior years, as you can see from this graph. Also in this graph, you can see there's a spike in 2018, which was caused by some major developments that year in our region. For example, the region had a couple of larger projects, including the Riverwoods project in Durham, which brought about 150 units. And then related to this, we know that the construction industry is facing a lot of uncertainty right now. In the developer survey that was conducted as part of this process for the RHNA, the developers shared that the rising cost of construction and just limited workforce available and just people trained in the trades are major challenges that they expect will continue to impact the pace of construction for them. The limited availability of homes is also seen in the vacancy rate in Stratford County. So for us, the average vacancy rate in 2021 was 0.9%, when, as Sarah said, in a healthy market, it should hover around 5%. Next slide, please. So the cost of housing is increasing for homes for sale. This data is through the first quarter of 2022, and it shows that the median purchase price for housing has been going up over the past years, while the average number of days on the market has seen a sharp decline. At the same time, the percent of list price received for homes has been increasing. And as we all know, just people are paying a lot more and doing it a lot more quicker. Even with the higher prices, housing units are not staying on the market. With the interest rate increases, things have started to cool off a bit. However, even more recent data that we have shows that the demand is still there and that prices are still continuing to go up. So, but the biggest difference, I'd say, is that they're spending a few more days on the market than before. And then related to this, affordability is also becoming a bigger issue. Like Sarah also pointed out, the recent rise in interest rates has meant that for someone looking to purchase a home, a $400,000 home, the 5% down payment and a 30-year loan, they would be paying $926 more today than they would a year ago, just in principal and interest alone, without including any insurance or HOA or any other costs associated with housing. This is pricing home buyers out of the market even more, and as a result, they're being pushed into what we already know is an strange rental market. Next slide, please. The cost of housing for houses for homes for rent is also increasing. When it comes to renting, vacancy rates in Stratford County have seen an incredibly sharp decline, as mentioned earlier, and as seen on the graph to the far left. And although it's not shown on this graph, we know that the vacancy rate for 2022 has continued to decline even further. Meanwhile, the gross rents are also increasing, as you can see in the middle graph. For 2021, the median rent for a two-bedroom unit was $1,394, and the income needed to afford the median rent was $55,800. But in reality, in the SRPC region in 2021, the median household income for renters specifically was $47,379, and the rent that they could actually afford on that income was $1,184. Next slide, please. So here we looked at housing and how it's out of reach for many workers in our region's primary industries. Wages have increased in our region, but at a much slower pace than the increases in the cost of housing. So below, we just explore the affordability by occupation, where we look at the salaries across 15 different sectors and what their max affordable rent and purchase price for housing is, and how that compares to the 2022 median rent for purchase price in the region. So the first, the slide shows affordability by occupation for a single full-time worker. And the bars show what the max affordable purchase price for rent is, or the max affordable purchase or rent prices. And then the black horizontal line shows the median purchase or rent price for 2022. So on the left, we see that out of all the occupations listed here, only engineers, registered nurses, and higher experienced electricians and police officers would be able to afford the max affordable rent in the region, which is just over $1,500 on their salary alone. And then even more shocking, the chart on the right shows that none of the 15 occupations, no matter what their experience level is, would be able to afford the 2022 median sold price, which was around $360,000 on their salary alone. And then it's not included in this presentation, but we also ran the numbers for 2 full-time workers in the same occupation to see what they could afford. And the results showed that the majority of workers would still not be able to afford the 2022 median rent. And for purchase, out of the 15 occupations, only the combined wages of 2 engineers, registered nurses, and higher experienced police and electricians would be able to afford the median sold price. So in summary, what this all shows is that a single income or even 2 incomes for many of the region's largest industries are still not enough to afford today's housing costs. Next slide, please. So here we go over the housing needs projections. In order to come up with the housing needs projections for each region, Root Policy Research projected the number of housing units that are needed to meet the projected population and employment demand to support a more balanced housing market. So in other words, what was taken into account was future residents as well as the labor market. Next slide, please. So here we take a look at the SRPC region and what our needs are. Here we have a need of 9,520 new units that are expected to be needed between ownership and rental in order to accommodate the needs of our region. So that's an average of 476 units per year through 2040. And then just for reference, from 2010 to 2020, the region added 4,715 new units. So that's an average of 472 a year, which just comes to show us that with the right implementation of housing policies, these projections aren't at all unrealistic or unattainable. Next slide, please.
And to give a snapshot of what the housing needs projections look like for the RPC region, so new units between 2020 and 2040 projected by Root Policy Research's model was just over 14,500. This breaks out to about 9,769 owner-occupied units and 4,794 renter-occupied units. This slide further breaks it down by workforce qualifying units and non-workforce qualifying units as well. And to give perspective, as Natalie did, so between 2010 and 2020, in the region, we produced just over 5,000 new housing units added, so over a 10-year period. So our number 14,500 is definitely more, and it would need to be produced at a higher pace of what we've seen historically over the last 10-year period.
So to help achieve these projections, we have created what is called the Housing Toolbox, which is a supplementary standalone document that was created by the sub-consultant Atwood Studio with the help of a statewide toolbox subcommittee that was made up of staff from all RPCs. What the toolbox is meant to provide is it's meant to give municipalities innovative zoning and planning strategies that can help them with housing production. So beyond providing a detailed description of each tool, the toolbox offers an explanation of ways in which the tool can help communities, how they can get started, considerations to keep in mind, any issues addressed, relevant state laws, case studies, and resources that can help with implementation. Each RPC is really free to incorporate this tool into their housing needs assessment however they choose. So, for example, it can be an addendum to their RHNA, or it can be incorporated directly into the final document. I should also mention that Outwith Studio will be working on a phase 2 of this project, which entails a web page with all of these tools that can be disseminated to any municipal stakeholders and other interested parties and organizations. And then lastly, on the next slide, we have a list of all of the tools that are being covered in the toolbox. So there's a total of 19 tools that are explored extensively in this resource. And that is the end of our presentation. So I'll open it up for any questions.
Thanks, guys. This is Tori Jennison with Stratford County. I have a question about homeless data and general and emergency shelter data. Was that included in this assessment?
Yes. Natalie, do you want to take it? I see you.
Sure. I was just going to say we did cover this. This is a really, really like high level overview of what the RHNA includes, and homelessness was something that we looked into. So like Jen said in our group chat, we will be posting for public comment. So everyone will get a chance to look at the full document and all of the data that we have on that, and anything else. For our region specifically, I know that we don't have a ton of data on homelessness. I'm not sure about your region, Sarah.
Yeah, I don't believe there's a lot of regional specific data on homelessness to begin with the exception of areas like Nashua and Manchester. So our regional data is not overly robust, but we do include everything that we have and the statewide data as well.
Yeah.
As well as there is a section, I believe, in every RHNA across the state that goes over specific communities of interest, and the homelessness population is one of those communities of interest. That's not something that Natalie or I touched on in today's presentation, but we do go in depth at sort of specific populations that do have unique needs when it comes to housing.
Yeah, and along with that, we also talk about the resources that are available to those communities.
Great, thank you.
If I can just give a comment from the Seacoast area, I think it's really important, and I appreciate the difficulty of trying to accumulate statistics around the homeless. But as we all know, this past weekend, we had a cold front, and my phone was ringing off the hook from places like Seabrook, Hampton, about what can we do to help the homeless get through this weekend. And fortunately, with the help of some of our local municipalities and nonprofits, and including Councilor Janet Stevens, we were able to help. But what it brought to our attention is that we don't have accurate numbers. I can't tell you how many people in Seabrook are homeless or in Hampton. So I think maybe something that maybe we can look forward to in the future is to really try to figure out a way, maybe dealing with some nonprofits that probably have the best pulse on the homeless, on trying to identify that number. And the reason I bring this up is that there was one homeless woman in Seabrook. She lives in a tent. However, she works, and she works a full-time job making $16 an hour, and she can't find housing. So she continues to live in a tent. Those are the types of statistics that we need to start looking at in the future. And how do we address those types of individuals? I know Councilor Stevens is taking on a personal mission to try to find her adequate housing, especially since this woman does want to work, and she's working hard, but living in a tent. So that's just my comment.
Absolutely. I appreciate the comment, John. And I see in the chat just a couple of questions about where things are posted. RPC does have, we've posted a video of sort of our bigger RHNA preview presentation on our website, as well as starting to post sort of some of our appendix documents, which includes all of our data metrics and resources. So those can be found on the website, and I can drop the link in the chat. We will hopefully be posting our full document for folks to see the week, probably next week. It's in the hands of the graphic designer. So as soon as we get it back from her, it'll be posted up on the website and sent out via our newsletter and our other streams of communication as well. Any other questions? James?
I'm sure this will not be the last question you get about the fair share analysis. But I was curious what your methodology was for taking the statewide and region-wide projections and assigning shares of that to municipalities. Was it based on current population? Was it based on an analysis of where there is infrastructure and room for that development, some combination of the two?
Great.
Sarah, do you want to take that, or do you want me?
You're welcome to if you want.
Sure. So we worked with a consultant, Root Policy Research, to prepare the housing production model. And what they did is they started with the population projections for 2020 through 2040. And what they did is they utilized a headship model to determine the anticipated number of new households. And that looked at the rate of household formation by the age of the householder, per the census definition. From there, the households were distributed to municipalities, or allocated to municipalities, half and half, based on two different approaches. The first half was they purely took that municipality's anticipated household formation as a result of the population projections. And then the other 50%, they did a shimmying based upon the municipality's share of the projected labor market area employment growth. And so that's how they got to that base number of projected new households at the municipal level. From there, the total number of households was distributed to renter and owner occupied households based upon the current split of renter and owner occupied households. And then from there, further split between those for owner occupied above and below 100% of the area median income for a 4-person household, which is the state workforce housing definition of affordable for owner occupied, and then also above and below 60% of the area median income for renter households, again, derived from the workforce housing statutes. Very, very, very wonky and technical. There is a full write-up and documentation that we do have for anyone that wants to kind of dive in further. The other piece that was added into that is they looked at the current shortage of housing units to get us today, or I should say at 2020, up to a balanced vacancy rate of 5% vacancy on the rental side, 2% vacancy on the homeowner side. Those were then distributed over the 20-year projection horizon. And then also over that 20-year projection horizon, they added in vacancy for each of those 5-year projection increments to maintain that level of balance in the market. They did also provide some guidance for some other ways that we could think about regional adjustments. I know that we in the Stratford region did not apply those regional adjustments because ultimately our commissioners felt that it was arbitrary in making those types of adjustments. So,
and just to add to that as well, so obviously as Jen just kind of gave a more in-depth overview, the model is very complicated. We at RPC also did do sort of what I would call a rough and dirty analysis of housing opportunity based off of infrastructure. So James, the other part of your question, water and sewer, we did sort of a co-occurrence based off of where water and sewer exists, as well as sort of major transportation networks. And that will be incorporated as part of our assessment. Route policy also provided us a similar sort of development capacity test as part of their deliverables that also looked at sort of water and sewer infrastructure and development capacity of the land.
And I might just chime in from OPD's perspective, just a couple things I know keeps coming up. These numbers stream up or stream down from the state level housing needs assessment that New Hampshire Housing is working on. That's going to be coming out very shortly. Also note that these are only need for year-round housing units. They don't include any kind of projections about seasonal units or short-term rentals, which will presumably make that kind of projected need even higher than what each of the RPCs are reporting in their RHNA.
Thanks, Noah.
Could I ask a quick question on the model? Does it account for kind of the you build it and they will come scenario? Because right now we probably have a slower population growth because we don't have the housing units to support it. If you start building those units, will that population expand over that 20-year period?
So I think that's the intention of splitting the household projections between population growth and employment growth. And so that employment growth kind of takes away that constraint of or dependent variable of where is the existing housing? And so it says, where should the existing housing be to support that needed growth in our communities based upon, a healthy economy? Does that make sense? The other piece of it is the population projections also are independent from housing production or past housing production. It does in part look at the past trend though, when the population projections did kind of allocate, because the population projections are done at the county level and then allocated to municipalities. And so that is influenced by past growth within that individual municipality, whereas the employment growth piece is not.
Yeah, it's probably an understatement that there are a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
In the whole thing. One other follow-up question, in terms of the affordability index, you were talking about averages and what income was needed. Particularly, I was struck by the mortgage rate changes. I didn't see, though, also escrow amounts, property taxes, insurances. That's only going to make those numbers even worse.
Absolutely.
I assume those weren't accounted for in the model?
In the RPC slide that I showed that had the two interest rates kind of compared between 2021 and 2022, we factored in a sort of 40% calculation towards the monthly payment for like utilities, taxes, interest rates. But as far as a down payment goes, it wasn't included in that calculation. And I don't believe it was included from a down payment perspective in the fair share numbers as well, or in the route policy model either.
I know that we didn't take that into account. We just mentioned that, it wasn't included in those total costs, but the calculations didn't include those numbers. But yeah, obviously it would be much higher than what we show because we only account for principal and interest.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Seeing none, let's pull our agenda back up. So we've got 13 minutes left on the call. Just want to take the opportunity to sort of, John has his hand up. John, is this housing related or? Okay. So just taking this opportunity to sort of go through anyone who has any general updates or project initiatives or anything like that that they want to share, and I'll hand it off to John first.
Thank you. Just two quick things for those of you that follow this whole child daycare scenario here in the state. I have hot off the press. Senator Shaheen just co-sponsored a new bill in Congress, and it's Senate Bill 268. It's so new that they still haven't worked out the full text of the bill, but basically it's a bill that she is supporting to help the shortage of childcare and qualified childcare professionals. Also to provide some grants to different states for education and training and retention. So it's a bill that I think we need to watch, especially since it's coming from our own senator, that could provide some additional funding to the state of New Hampshire in helping with the workforce of childcare professionals. That's one thing. And then the other bit of news, staying with childcare for a minute, I don't know if any of you knew, but the state of New Hampshire received $77 million for childcare support in a variety of different projects. Out of that 77 million, which is all being administered by the DHSS, there is $28 million left that they're going out for an RFP in 4 areas. One, increasing equitable access to affordable and quality childcare. 2, strengthening the childcare workforce. 3, strengthening program quality. And 4, strengthening overall childcare systems throughout the state. That's being administered right now by DHSS or DHHS. Get those initials screwed up all the time. But that's something that we should also be looking at, because I mean, that's $28 million here in the state of New Hampshire that we should be looking at, especially for those of us that are advocating in support of childcare improvements, childcare professional workforce, etc.
Thanks, John. It looks like Joe, you have your hand up as well.
Oh, yes. I just wanted to let people know that at the town council meeting last night in Durham, Durham extended the housing task force for another year and doubled the size of it to 10 people. They are very serious about wanting to do their share of the work here in the Seacoast. There is a little thorny issue, is they want to create new housing, but they don't want to create a lot of undergraduate student housing. In fact, they don't want to create much of that, but it's very hard to separate it. But just as a heads up, they are working on the issue and are trying to find how they can, as I said, do their share.
Great. James?
2 things. On the childcare issue, I got an adorable video from daycare yesterday of Senator Shaheen chatting with Miriam and her friend. So Miriam might be in some of the press that they're releasing around this bill. She's wearing a pink Muddy Buddy, if any of you see it. And she actually is her senator. And then yes, on yesterday's call, with BEA, Commissioner Caswell mentioned that Northern Border Regional Commission is up for reauthorization, and that the legislation is considering adding Merrimack County to the service area. Mike Scala also brought up the possibility of, if Merrimack County is being added, can we look at Stratford County? So Mike, I'm not sure if you have learned anything new since yesterday, but I wanted to at least mention it here in case others were interested in how to advocate. I think Senator Shaheen's office is also behind the reauthorization bill on that.
So James, just an update on that. I think Mike is meeting with somebody in his office right now, but he was gonna reach out to Bobby Graham from Shaheen's office to talk more about it.
Okay.
I don't know if he has yet.
Anyone else with updates, comments, questions?
I did put, Ginny was unable to be on the call today, and I did put 2 updates from her. Please ignore the first link. I was doing the copy and pasted over my data collection. So, but you'll see a longer message that it talks about the New Hampshire State Council of the Arts extending a deadline, and then new nominations are open for the Governor's Arts Awards. If you have any questions, you can direct them to Ginny.
And to just give an update for this meeting, next meeting that we have on the 21st will be the in-person Invest New Hampshire Roadshow in Dover. We will be sending out an invitation on that hopefully by the end of this week. Unsure if it's going to start at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. So if maybe just be aware that it could be starting at 10 a.m. But we'll have more details on that to come later this week. All right, last call. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Have a great Tuesday.